Hey everyone, Mr. Happy here, and in this video we'll be doing a full breakdown on the BARD job changes and additions coming in Endwalker. This information is fresh out of the latest media tour, but bear in mind everything in this video is still subject to change before Endwalker's release. For that reason, I won't be focusing much on potencies. We don't really fully understand the calculation changes behind the scenes, and these potencies could just not be final at all, so I'm not going to get hung up on them. Oh, and also there is a playlist in the description and from clicking the little I in the top right corner to check out all of my other Endwalker job change videos that I'm releasing today. With that, let's get started. For Endwalker, BARD went through some noticeable changes to its songs and skills, but the general flow should still be familiar to anyone who's played it in the last 4 years. The songs, for example, all still have the same effects, but they now last 45 seconds instead of 30 seconds. This is an adjustment that reduces the frequency of swapping between them, and also means that the songs will loop around at a time that is generally better for 60-second and 120-second gameplay loops, which is something they're aiming to do in Endwalker. Dots were also adjusted to last 45 seconds as well, so they really only expect you to refresh the dots either once every song window or inside of a buff window, which we'll get to talk about in a little bit. Raging Strikes was also adjusted to be every 60 seconds now instead of every 80 seconds like in Shadowbringers. This again helps it align with every buff window from the party a lot more consistently. Battle Voice also had its cooldown adjusted from 180 seconds down to 120 seconds. Exact same effect, but just on a 2-minute cooldown instead of 3, so that should be pretty nice. Everything else level 80 and below should be identical, minus potencies being changed. Yes, that means Battle Voice still only hits allies. Yes, so do your songs. I didn't expect this to change, but I figured I'd confirm it for you. After level 80, BARD just gets a few tools to round out the job going into level 90. At level 82, Quick Knock transforms into Layden's Bite. It just deals a bit more potency, and it still comes with that same chance to proc a Rain of Death or Bloodletter reset. Speaking of Bloodletter, they finally did it. At level 84, BARD is allowed to stack up to 2 Bloodletter or Rain of Death charges. These skills still do share recast, charge time, and proc, but I asked for this for all of Shadowbringers, and it's finally here. Ironically though, now that we have it, it doesn't really solve any of my issues for wanting it in the first place. You see, I wanted it before, so if you got a proc, you wouldn't overcap your bloodletters immediately, and it gave you a bit of time to use them without putting on as much pressure. But in the Mediator build, one or both of your dots can proc Mage's Ballad at the same time. This means you can instantly go from 0 stacks to 2, effectively creating the same problem we had when we only had 1 charge before. Guess I need to ask for 3 in that case. At level 86, BARD gets a new skill, Blast Arrow. This attack can be used after activating Apex Arrow with at least 80 soul gauge. It deals a set amount of damage and align with significant fall-off damage after the first target hit. This makes getting 80 soul gauge the primary goal for every burst window now with Apex Arrow, and hitting both Apex and Blast Arrow in every Raging Strikes. However, one thing to note is that you can hold the use of Blast Arrow for up to 30 seconds. So if you do, let's say, hit 100 gauge outside of a buff window, you can still use it and hold a Blast Arrow to use inside of your buff window and then continue to generate soul gauge. Unless, of course, you somehow got it at just that bad of a timing and it's just screwed no matter what. Hopefully that doesn't happen. At level 88, BARD has its Troubadour cooldown reduced to 90 seconds. This is consistent across the board for all the ranged physical jobs, with Shield, Samba, and Tactician also being reduced to 90 seconds at the same level. Finally, at level 90, BARD's capstone skill is Radiant Finale. This new skill and the trait Minstrel's Coda cause your ballad, paean, and minuet songs to each generate a coda on your job gauge when you activate them, shown on the right side of the gauge itself. When you activate Radiant Finale, it will consume these coda, and you and your party will get a damage buff based on the number of coda you had when using it. This buff lasts 15 seconds, and yes, the BARD does get the buff as well. Now with 1 coda, the finale raises the party's damage by 2%. With 2 coda, it goes all the way up to 4%, and with 3 coda, it raises just a bit to 5%. However, Radiant Finale also only has a 90-second cooldown, so I wonder what the usage is going to look like. Will it be worth it to activate it on cooldown so you don't lose entire uses of it in longer fights? I mean, 3 coda is only a 1% increase, though during buff windows, the timing might be more important than the 1% itself. If you delayed it for 2-minute reopeners, you'd lose an entire use on an 8-minute encounter, but if you use it right at the start of a fight, it's also only the 2% buff version. It's going to come down to total encounter times, when bosses force downtime, and the likes, and I expect experienced Bard theory crafters will develop specific boss timings to ensure this is as effective as possible. So for your rotation, all the basic ideas are still there. Maintain dots, rotate through your songs, and try to make sure your off-global skills don't sit unused for very long. However, with having a proper 60-second buff window now thanks to Raging Strikes, some tools work a bit more consistently in your rotation. Using Apex Arrow every 80 gauge as long as it's at least in Raging Strikes is quite feasible, not to mention that means Sidewinder finally fits cleanly into the rotation now, as opposed to having an awkward difference in timing from when it became available to when your buff windows would actually be happening. For your opener, I'd assume it's almost completely identical to the Shadowbringer's opener, of course adjusted for your skill speed. There's a few different openers right now. You'll have an extra Bloodletter proc, and potentially be using an early Radiant Finale, math pending, but that's about it. It's not like you'll get enough procs in that first Raging Strikes to get 80 plus soul gauge for an Apex Arrow, unless you're just that lucky somehow. 3-stack Perfect Pitches, Iron Jaws refreshing under buffs, and Barrage with Refulgent Arrow so long as you don't overwrite a straighter shot buff. That sounds exactly the same as to what we have now. Reopeners on Bard, though, definitely go through a bit of an adjustment. 60 seconds into the fight, you'll have to consider your soul gauge. If you have 80 plus soul gauge, it's probably worth using inside of Raging Strike so you can get to Blast Arrow, but you might have already used the 100 gauge beforehand and just have to save the Blast Arrow for the window. Maybe you get lucky enough and you get a Blast Arrow, and then you get enough to get another Apex that then triggers another Blast Arrow. Possible, but you know, my luck's not that good in my opinion. For your 60-second reopeners, you should also be in the middle of Mage's Ballad as well, so you'll have a ton of extra Bloodletter procs to deal with during this time. Other than that, refresh your dots, use your off-globals, and do your normal Bard upkeep. On 2-minute reopeners, it's more of the same, except that these are always during Minuet, just like your opener. There is, of course, a Battle Voice and a Barrage in these every time as well, as those are both 2-minute cooldowns. At this point, I'm just wondering about Radiant Finales, so Bard mains and Theory Crafters, we will trust in you to nail this down come expansion time. So as someone who was a critic of Bard in 5.x, do I think these changes make the job feel better? Well, I'd actually say it's a bit of a mixed bag. Soul Gauge is still a bit tacked on in my opinion. I get that it's still just a bunch of procs like the rest of the job, but it just feels not necessary. At least it does have another feel-good skill that comes from it to try and make it a little bit more at home in Bard's toolkit. But I think the flow of the rotations and the reopeners, I think they make a lot more sense now, minus still needing to know the math behind Radiant Finale timings. There's also a bit less song and dot maintenance, which is also kind of a double-edged sword. It's good because sometimes the job does get really hectic, and you don't want to have to think about those things as much, especially during Ballad. But when it's not being hectic, it's kind of a burst shot simulator, and with longer song and dot times, I suspect we'll be seeing a bit more of that. I also can't believe I never considered the possibility of being able to get 2 Ballad procs at the same time with your 2 separate dots, and instantly recapping Bloodletters when you have 2 charges. Ballad is definitely going to stay busy, but outside of Ballad, the pressure to use Bloodletters should be slightly diminished. I'm also still waiting for Bard's Bane equivalent, but it seems like that day may never come at this point. Either way, I need to give the job some more time once we actually get it on the live servers, so once Endwalker releases, we'll definitely revisit this in a video. And with that, that's going to be a wrap for my overview and thoughts on the changes coming to Bard in Endwalker. Be sure to like, favorite, subscribe, and share, and of course check out all the other Endwalker job change videos on the channel. With that, I'll see you in the next one, and until then, take care.